committee went back and came back with what we have now, that the accusation must be in writing, sworn to, and signed by the accuser. Again, for the same reason, there are bells that ring that cannot be unrung. And it's just a terrible tragedy when a person with a tremendous ministry today and a tremendous future ministry ends up with an almost hopeless future of receiving another call when a false accusation is made. So that's a very important part. Now what? Oh, you okay?
You did that, yes.
All right.
Louder.
Louder?
No, you just got louder.
Oh. I apologize for having to read from this paper. We were supposed to have a podium, and so this is my podium now. Now, we have in our canons that whenever possible, the bishop shall meet with the accuser. And that goes along with the other modifications that we've made to Title IV, Canon 3, which the bishop has to make a determination as to credibility now. Prior to this change that took place yesterday, the test was if it's found to be not frivolous, then you proceed. And the test now is it credible or is it not credible? And so once that is done, and as far as the accusations go, if the accusations are found to be without merit and the accuser not credible, then it would go to the standing committee if the accuser makes that request. And the standing committee then has 30 days to make the response. And if the standing committee agrees that it's credible, you're right back to investigation. If it's found to not be credible, then the case should be closed appropriately. And generally that means, and most of the people in this room are aware of that, it should be written response to the accuser with what's happened, because you've already told them up at the beginning, and that's part of another course. But you've already told them at the beginning, we are taking everything you're saying seriously. They're treated well, they're cared for, pastoral care if necessary, and the same for the accused in what we do. Now, once you get back to the investigation, at this point, the bishop has already found that it was credible. So then you contact your canonical investigator. And your canonical investigator should already have been in place. It should be someone that is trained. I would suggest, from my personal experience, that it not necessarily be someone who was a law enforcement investigator. The first time that I was called in to be a canonical investigator, well, Hugo and Scott contacted me and said, Jeff, we've got something for you. And, I went in, and there had been a very in-depth investigation, but the motive of this person was already, this is so bad, I'm going to write a report in a way that is going to be bad for the clergy. And there were many stages in that investigation that Matthew 18 opportunities were just passed up. And in the way it was presented to the bishop was that it was just ongoing, but yet, and then other people were talking about it, and this investigator, and this is something that should never occur, had a meeting with 3 or 4 of the witnesses at one time. Same room, same place. And we all know from the Apocrypha, Susanna and the Elders, and for people that have been to law school, you cannot do it that way. Because that story just starts lining up in a certain way that almost can't be overcome. But anyway, I went as the canonical investigator on top of the investigation that had been started at a less formal level before that, and came in and said that based on all the opportunities that were missed for reconciliation and to determine if anyone was repentant and that were missed along the way, that should not have further juridical process. And that's eventually what happened. Okay. We do have a new part of the canon, recusal. This was a decision. It did come out of the governor's task force that the bishop can recuse himself whenever he believes he can't fairly assess the credibility of the accuser or the accusations or the accused. He shall recuse himself and delegate the investigation, presentment, or sentencing to another bishop having jurisdiction. That's a wonderful thing. And my prayer with that, though, is that it not become the norm, the exception not become the norm, because if it does, then it could completely eclipse our obligation to do our own good hard work in our own diocese. And but it's there and it's good and has a good purpose, but we don't want, like dispensations. Oftentimes dispensations in the past, in the history of canon law throughout the ages, the exception has become the rule. Phil's shaking his head. Okay, very importantly, along these stages, if you're representing the clergy or if you are representing your diocese, be sure to remind the clergy in writing that there's the opportunity to confess the truth of the allegations and submit to the discipline of the church. And someone's opinion in those cases can change over time. I've seen it happen. I've seen it go from where they wanted to do that, we got into it, investigated, and they decided not to. And I've also been in a situation where they did not want to, but as things went forward, straight talk, and they decided that's what God's will really was in this case. Okay, we do have.
Can I ask a question there? You're saying that representing the bishop, or you might suggest to the person who's accused to go ahead and sign the petition? Did I misunderstand that?
Well, I'm saying that should be. It is perfectly fine for when you have that meeting. You know, that initial meeting with the person who's being accused, to say, here's sort of what the process is. You don't have to leave them in the complete blank. And I think, I don't think it's improper for them to.
And I'm not saying, it just sounds, I'm just coming from a different, the criminal. In other words, they don't have a lawyer yet. They may not get a lawyer, but they're sitting there with the bishop, the accused, and the bishop, and the chancellor. But at that point, the chancellor could suggest, if you want to come clean, confess.
Well, I don't think you'd say it that way. I think you would just use the canonical language, because they've encountered that in their seminary or somewhere along the way, and they can read the canons and they know what's there, and you don't want to put it in the way that would be improper, or you're trying to force it. But you say, here's where we are.
Okay, I'm just taking me a while to adjust to the different circumstance.
Right.
Obviously, you wouldn't do that, with a policeman, a judge, and an accused and prosecutors. you know.
Well, no, we
But
have-
It's a different circumstance,
Yeah.
I just.
Right, our criminal system has its master and we have our master. And we're trying to serve him. Now, time limitations of actions, we had some discussion about that yesterday. And there's a lot of, you're talking about the criminal law, there's a lot of interest in some cases to completely do away with statutes of limitations for certain victims in certain situations. But again, we always have with, and the reason for limitations of actions throughout the law is that memories fade, evidence is lost, witnesses move and can't be found, and so things naturally get harder and harder and harder, and so you have a reasonable statute of limitations for multiple reasons. Because you can imagine what the expense to a diocese would be if you're down there 10 or 15 years or 20 years later trying to find witnesses, trying to chase that down on an allegation that is made so late. And I understand all of these situations, and I agree with the psychology